I want to consider a couple of quotes before we here at the beginning today. This first quote is attributed to Albert Einstein. So he would have been the inventor at the end of the 20th century, I guess the middle of the 20th century. But from everything I looked up, this is often attributed to him, but there's no evidence he ever said it. So just let it be loosely assumed that he could have said this, but regardless of who said it, it's still a quote worth considering. So here's his first quote. "The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking." So that quote, and the reason people think Albert could have said it, if you know his story, he was a Jew who escaped the Holocaust and then helped the government develop the bombs that were dropped at the end of World War II. And I don't know how he felt about that, but he was one of the few people in the world who could help do all that work. But he lived it for real, the Holocaust and all that happened with it. And for him to say, look, the world that we're living is the world that we have created with our thinking. And if we want a different world, a world where we don't have World War II again, we have to think differently than we do now. Makes sense, right? Now the other quote comes from Marcel Proust. I don't actually know how to say his name. He's a French writer. I did not know who he was. I think I maybe have heard of him, but I've never read anything that he's written, so don't feel bad if you're like, I don't know who that guy is. He was the end of the 19th, early 20th century, so 1800s to early 1900s is when he lived. And this is the quote that he said. And this is almost certainly something that he said. It was one of his books. "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." So a second quote that's really pushing us to consider that if we want the world to be different, or if we want to have a different experience in life, the solution isn't necessarily to change where we are, to move or to get a new career or to start a life in some other place, but it's to have new eyes, to see the current landscape differently. Both of these quotes capture what's going on in our hearts, and they point us towards the message, or the message of Easter points us towards these quotes and says, do we need to have new eyes? Do we need to see and think differently? And that's exactly the kind of challenge that Easter brings to all of us. So on this fourth Sunday of Easter, I want you to think about these questions. Do you need to think differently? Do you need new eyes? Does the message of Easter and the good news of Jesus' resurrection change the world in such a way that we need to think differently and see differently? And then if we do, then what is it we're supposed to do about that? And today we're going to look at a parable that Jesus taught in the Gospel of John to explore this idea. So if you want to take out the Pew Bible and follow along, or if you want to follow in your personal Bible up on the screen, the Pew Bible, it is page 1527. We're going to be looking at the John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10 together today. This is our gospel reading for the day. So let's take a look at this passage. Again, that's John 10, 1 through 10. And let's see how this comes together with what we've already taken a look at. So here's how this passage opens. "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Now, to understand this passage, we have to understand the backstory. So this is one of those places in Scripture, specifically in the Gospels, where we can't just open our Bible and read and then understand. Because what happened right before this is why Jesus tells this parable. And we can't understand the parable unless we understand what he was doing right before. So if we were to go back into chapter 9, which we won't do now, other than just me reminding you of what happened, we actually read, I think, almost all of chapter 9 earlier in the year on the fourth Sunday of Lent. This whole story we read. I read it in the service, and then I jumped through a couple portions in the sermon. So in this story, there's a man who was born blind, and Jesus heals him. But he heals the man on the Sabbath. And people recognize this man who is now seen, and he's gone to the temple to offer a tax and celebration for what has happened. And the religious leaders learn, hey, this is the guy who was blind, and now he sees. And so they launch an investigation to figure out how this happened. They want to know how this guy can see. They found out that Jesus has healed him. And worse, they find out that Jesus healed him on the Sabbath. And so they aren't happy about this. And they eventually ask the man, do you believe that Jesus did this? Or do you think he was some sort of basically someone using evil in the sorcerer or something? And the guy said, look, all I know is I was blind and now I see. And he has a very gentle confession about Jesus maybe being the Messiah. And that's enough for the religious leaders to kick him out of the synagogue. To say, you know what, if you're with this guy, you're not with us, get out of here. And later, Jesus has a conversation with the Pharisees. And he says to them that I came to show, to give sight to the blind and to blind those who can see. And what he was just trying to say is, the people who think they can see, they're not going to see me, and they're actually going to become blind. And the Pharisees are like, well, so you're saying that we're blind? He's like, no, if you were blind, you would be forgiven. He's like, but actually you're rejecting me, so you're actually in a worse case. And then he tells this parable. And so this parable in some way is about the Pharisees. And it's about how they treated this blind man. And that's what we had to have in the background as we look at it. And now we need to look at a couple of the characters and items in this parable to better understand. So here's all of the items in the parable. There's a sheep pen, there's a gate, there's sheep, there's a shepherd, and there's a thief / a robber. So each of these pieces of the parable is referring to somebody. And when we get all this put together, we can understand the parable. So here is what these pieces refer to. So the sheep pen is the people collectively. This is the one I'm the least confident in. I just don't know how to describe the sheep pen. Because it's clearly like where you go to have salvation, but it's somehow also where the people of God are. So basically the sheep pen, those in the pen as a collective are the people of God. So that is Israel, that is the church together, is in the sheep pen. Now the gate is those who have the authority to lead in this case, because those who can lead go through the gate. The sheep are the people individually, because there's the people of God as a collective, then each of us have a responsibility to follow Jesus on our own. And then there's the shepherd, that's the rightful leader, and then the thief or the robber, and this is the false leaders. And so as we work through this story, we see that Jesus is putting himself into the position of the leader. So Jesus says, I am the rightful leader. He says the sheep are the people of God. In this case, it would have been the man who was healed from the blind. Now the gate is, if you are in the pen, as the leader of the people, you have the authority to be there. But he says that these robbers didn't enter through the pen. They got in another way. And they're only there to steal. Because the leader goes in and the sheep know his voice and they respond. And this man knows Jesus. He hears the voice of his shepherd and he responds. And then there's the Pharisees who have come in to the pen over the wall. And they're trying to steal and destroy the people of God. And so that's what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees. But they don't get it. But before we look at their response, I want to ask all of us a question. Because in this story, it comes down to who are you following? Who is your shepherd? The religious leaders have been leading Israel for a long time at this point. And Jesus comes, and when he comes, they reject him. The true shepherd comes to be with his people. And the shepherds that he had put in their place while he was gone, the Old Testament talks about this all the time. It talks about the kings and the religious leaders as the shepherds of God's people. Pastor is a term that's another term for shepherd. If you've ever heard of the word vicar, which is an old school name for a pastor from England, that's short for vicarious. Somebody who is in place of Jesus is a vicar. They are being placed in his place to lead the sheep. That is my responsibility. I am only a shepherd of the sheep because I've been placed in place of Jesus. I am just vicariously in his place as a representative. I have no authority other than what he gives me. And that's what the religious leaders had, but they were abusing it. And so Jesus says, you are actually not shepherds. You are false leaders. You are thieves. So this leads us to the question, who are we following? Now for us, it's not as clear-cut necessarily as Jews in the first century who had leaders who they were following, and now they had to choose the leaders or Jesus. We have all kinds of things that might be trying to lead us, and they might not seem very religious at all. But they could be, or they could be using religious language but not be religious. Or they could be using religious language but actually pulling us away from Jesus. So we need to discern who is leading us. And so the Pharisees, they don't know what to say to Jesus. And so this is what we get told by John, verse 6. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. So they don't understand, so then Jesus does this. Therefore, Jesus said again, and now he gives them a different version of this parable. Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thieves come only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. So now he slightly changes the story. Now the gate isn't the right to lead, but the gate is Jesus himself. And he says, only those who go through the gate, which is me, enter the pen as the people of God. And then he says to the religious leaders, he says, you have not gone through the gate. You've jumped over the wall. You're only there to destroy. Who are we following? You know, if we're here on a regular basis, if you're a part of the people of God, if you say, I follow Jesus, I'm a Christian, you're putting yourself in that pen. But there's a couple of questions. Have we entered the pen through the gate? Have we said yes to Jesus? But even if we're on the inside, are the people we're following leaders who've gone through the pen? Or are we getting led by somebody who just wants to take us and use us for whatever advantage they have? And the world has 100 of those causes every day that are trying to take us from the people of God and use us in the way that they want us to be used. So they can make a buck, so they can have power, so they can have authority. But Jesus wants to lead us. Are we open to following him? And if we do want to follow him, where does it lead? Because this is the part I think we can get scared about. If the story of Easter is true, and yes, we need to follow Jesus, what does that look like? How does that change our lives? How does the world look different? And this is what Peter says. He says, for it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we actually talked about suffering in 1 Peter, and now Peter returns to suffering later in his book. This is a different passage. Now, scholars are pretty positive that whatever is going on to the audience that Peter's writing, and we don't know exactly who he wrote this letter to. There's some guesses, but it doesn't say, so we don't know. But whatever was going on, these people were suffering. And so Peter wants to say to them, I know you're suffering and you follow Jesus, and it might be because of that. He's like, but look, this is a reason to suffer that's commendable before God. And then he says, in fact, the person you are following suffered also. So if you suffer, you're doing exactly what he has called you to do. Now, I realize that it's not fun to hear someone say, you know, suffering might happen, and that's a good thing. Because we hear the story of Jesus and we don't think that we're going to suffer, and we don't want to suffer. But what Peter says is that you might suffer a little, but a little suffering is okay when you look at the future. Because this is what he says next. When they hurled their insults at Jesus, Jesus, did not retaliate when he suffered. He made no threats. Instead, he trusted himself to him who judges justly. So Peter says, look, I know you might suffer, but he's like, it doesn't mean there won't be judgment and justice someday. It's just not up to you to do it. You don't have to be the one to seek justice. There's someone else who would do that for you. You can let that justice be served on your behalf later. And then he says this. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. He reminds us why Jesus suffered. He suffered so that we could be saved. And he suffered so that those of us who have been astray can have life again. So Jesus wants to lead us, and he wants to lead us into this new world that he's making. And yes, suffering might be part of that, but it's only a little glimpse of what's coming. And part of what happens is the more that we enter this new world, the more that maybe what we might have seen as suffering before, we don't actually see as suffering anymore. Now, we know that Haley today is out running a marathon. How many people would want to run a marathon voluntarily? Nobody other than her, I think, right? And if you've ever thought about it, like, why would anybody voluntarily run that far? Because it is a lot of suffering. But there's something weird about suffering. Like, suffering actually can produce goodness. And if you've ever heard about people who run a lot, there is this thing called the runner's high. I've never experienced it. But definitely, whenever you exercise a lot, you actually get to a point within your exercise where, yes, there is pain, but then there's also, because of what happens in your brain and in your body, there is pleasure and goodness in it. And people enjoy it. Suffering can actually lead to goodness. Just because we face a little suffering in life, it doesn't mean that it won't lead to something good. Most good things in life don't just come easily, aren't just handed to us. They require work, they require suffering. Jesus wants to lead us into this new world. And so he invites us to follow him, even if it means there'll be suffering. Because even though we might face suffering, we also get to be a part of something beautiful, which is what we heard in Acts. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. So this is the earliest followers of Jesus, the earliest Christians. This is what they did. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. They left their old life to follow Jesus and his apostles, the people he left and appointed to represent him, or who they followed. They had fellowship, which is this fancy word in Greek called koinonia. They had very close connection. They had a real community. They had harmony. And they ate together, or it could actually refer to the Lord's Supper, we don't know for sure, and they had prayer. What they did was they worshiped together. Their whole life was around this new way of living and following Jesus, and they devoted themselves to it. They had a new mindset. They had new eyes. They left behind their old world. They said, I don't like the way the world is now. I'm going to take this old thinking, I'm going to take and leave it here. I'm going to take up this new thinking the way that they teach it, the apostles do. I'm going to take up these new eyes. We think about the quotes from earlier. And when we do this, we become a part of this new community. So when we say yes to Jesus, we begin to see the world differently. We begin to be changed. We begin to do things we never would have done before. Because Jesus wants to lead us into his new world of life and harmony. Because this new world brings life and it brings harmony, the two things that were lost in the garden. In the garden, we had death and we had chaos. And in this new world, we have life and we have harmony. As we heard, this is the way they lived. Everyone was filled with all of the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who was in need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in the homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This is what happened in that early time. I'm not going to tell you that our church needs to be just like this one. I'm not saying that we need to all sell all of our land and bring it together. That was how they survived in the first century. It was a completely different economic system, different needs, different challenges. But what mattered was that they were putting each other first. They were coming together and creating a new world, a world with harmony and a world with life. This is the world that Jesus wants to make for his followers. And Jesus wants to lead us into his new world of life and harmony. Now, what this will look like is up to us to discern. How do we live this way in our community? We're doing some of those things. Like, we see that there are people who are hungry, so we do provide a way for them to have food. In the past, we have met the needs of people in our community, in our congregation. We have pooled resources and helped people. We have done that. Maybe not at the scale that the first century church did, but like I said, it's a different situation. And I'm certain that we would do it again if we saw the need. We help in other ways in the community. I think about what happened last week when we packed meals and how we support that group. How we have the Hero Meals in Decatur. We think about how we help people around the country and around the world with growing hope globally. There's many ways that we seek to have life and harmony in the world. But there's more that we could always do. And there's also that question of the people being added to our midst. I think that's the next place we can go in our congregation. How do we share the message of Jesus? How do we transform or be a part? We don't do it, the Holy Spirit does. But how are we a part of that work? The very last thing it says here, and the Lord added to their numbers daily those who are being saved. What is it that we can be a part of to see people being saved? Jesus wants to lead us into his new world of life and harmony. That's the invitation of Easter. Jesus is risen from the dead, and he says, repent and follow me. I am the good shepherd. I'm going to lead you into this new life, to this new world. To find this new world of life and harmony, we must learn to change our thinking like Albert Einstein said. If we want a different world, we need to think differently. The teachings of Jesus challenge us to think differently. And we need to have new eyes, like that second quote. The world might not change, but how we see it changes whenever we become more like Jesus. Those are two prayers that we can have. The first one, Jesus, help me to think differently, to think like you. And the second one is, help me, Jesus, to see the world the way that you see it. Those two prayers can be life-changing. And we can pray them every day. Help me to change my thinking to be more like you. And help me to see the world the way you see it. The more we see his work, the more that we become part of it. The more we become part of it, the more that we see how the world is transformed. And the more that he can work through us. Jesus wants to lead us into his new world of life and harmony. Are we going to follow him? Are we going to let him lead us into the new world that he wants to make? Are we going to be open to new ideas and have new eyes? Are we ready to share what we see with the world? Jesus wants to lead us into his new world of life and harmony. So may we follow him today.